Hello, Internet. My name is Jason Rakachewski. I just graduated with my Bachelor's of Science in English. My concentration was literature. I graduated with honors. Does that make me an authority on the topic of literature? No. But I'm going to give you my unfiltered opinion, okay? I'm going to put my degree into practice on the platform of YouTube. And if I can educate one person, then that's great. So today we're going to be reviewing Fyodor Dostoyevsky's Notes from Underground, one of my favorite short novellas that I've ever read, okay? Dostoyevsky hits at a lot of deep questions, deep questions. What are we living for? What is this all about? What is man concerned with? Okay, and so just to begin, I'm going to give you a summary, and then as I'm going through the summary, I'm going to rant and give you my analysis. If I go off on tangents, hey, guess what? That's the way the mind works, okay? Very associative, very stream of consciousness. I'm not James Joyce, but you're going to see me jumping all over the place. Please try to follow along, okay? Originally published in 1864. This novella, okay, my version is translated by Mira Ginsburg, so this is a translation, originally written in Russian, it would have been, as Fyodor Dostoyevsky is a Russian author. And this is a depressing as all hell novella, okay? Depressing, but to me, as many people will say, they identify with the underground man. And the underground should not be taken literal in regards to this novella, but rather the underground is a metaphor for the unconscious mind, okay? The difference about our unnamed narrator in this text is he is very much conscious, hyper-conscious, if you will, of the underground portion of his mind or the subconscious, and he's able to tap into it, okay? Very self-aware. So the novella is broken up into two parts. You have Underground, which is set in the present, and it is, so the novella is set in St. Petersburg, Russia, okay? And in the underground portion, we have a series of notes and vignettes taken detailing the narrator's thought processes and opinions on man, where he's going, and what he's concerned with. We have a criticism of enlightenment, criticism of rationalism, criticism of modern science, and how modern science is obsessed with discovering and coming up with an answer and a solution for everything. You know, can we predict where we're going to be in 10 years? And if everything is so predicted and so prearranged for us, what is the point of existing if we know the next 10 moves ahead of us? What is the point of, there's no anomaly, there's no surprise, there's no heartbreak if we know all the prearranged steps and are just following life as it were a track that is set before us, that we know all the twists and turns. Like a NASCAR track, you're just making a left turn. You know that left turn's coming up. And maybe many people's lives feel like this already, very mundane, very planned, organized, no break from the norm, if you will. You see the same people, you hear the same things, you have the same thoughts. Reoccurring thoughts. So we learn very early on, he is a spiteful individual, okay? very spiteful, very angry. What is he spiteful about? What is he angry about? Well, he tells us he is hyperconscious, and humans that are hyperconscious in the 1800s really can find no purpose. He talks about how he couldn't even become as much of an insect. You know, just to give you a taste of this is taken from the opening paragraph of the novella. It begins, I am a spiteful man. I'm a sick man, a spiteful man, an unattractive man. I think that my liver hurts, but in reality, I know a damn thing about my illness. You know, he talks about having respect for doctors, and he's well educated enough not to be superstitious, but he is superstitious. Contradiction. This novella follows a type of cyclical track of contemplation. We're left to decide whether the narrator can be trusted or not. Okay. Also, yeah, you have this cyclical path of contemplation. If I said concentration, contemplation, where he's going around in circles, but he never really gets anywhere because he can't. Even though he realizes his problems, he realizes, you know, exactly his spite. He recognizes his spite. He recognizes his inability to act. But this doesn't change anything. This does not force him into action. Rather, he says, the men who have it the best, who have the best lot, are men of action, men of a lowlier IQ. These men can go around life not thinking too much into things, but rather they act and then deal with the consequences after. And probably, rather to be one of those men than a man who is so self-aware, who recognizes the parameters of, his condition and those that are damning him to a meaningless existence, yet he can't act on these. This does not mean he knows how to put a solution into motion, okay? Then as we go, the second part of the novella is apropos of the wet snow, or in reference to the wet snow. So, also to jump back, we learn early on that our nameless narrator, receives an inheritance of 6,000 rubles from a distant relative, okay? And what he chooses to do with these rubles is he chooses to settle down in his corner and to write his notes, to write his confession, more or less, of his detachment and his sickness with society, honestly. It is a self-imposed isolation to some regard. And so I wrote about this text in my critical theory class. We had one research paper to write for the entire class. It was due at the end of the semester. My professor talked about it's more a class to mimic classes you'd be taking at a grad or doctoral level. So we look at the different critical lenses, critical approaches to literature. I chose trauma theory, and I chose Kathy Caruth's, because we read this text during the semester, at least a chapter from Unclaimed Experience. I think I wrote down the title of the chapter, perhaps. Or no, I didn't. So it's at least Unclaimed Experience, The Wound in the Voice. Don't quote me on that. But and she talks about, in this chapter, there are 4 key figures, and potentially more, that we can look at, and if we can identify these figures in a text, this may allude to traumatic experience, occurring within the text. So, and I track these figures to identify a trauma-laden subtext existing. And if you do read between the lines and really take time to think about this novella, I would say, so you have the departure from society, the 6,000 rubles he chooses to settle in his corner. No righteous man lives past the age of 40. Okay. I chose to settle down in it. So he's choosing to settle within the underground, choosing to settle in the subconscious, the subterranean terrain of his mind. And what he does there is he lets these thoughts, this inner turmoil just blast away at him. And he talks about taking a sweet pleasure in the disgust he has for himself. Such degradation, and just oozes with spite and resentment and everything else, okay? But continuing on, to jump forward, sorry, because I lost my track. So yeah, it follows a very paradoxical stuff. Oh yeah, I was talking about the paper I wrote. See, I jump around and then I lose my place. So just bear with me. And I'm doing this all off one take, so, because I'm not editing it down, not doing it. I'm lazy, okay? I'm lazy. I procrastinate. I ask for extensions on my papers. Yeah, so when I wrote this paper, I tracked those key figures, and what I found is he's plagued by this hyperconsciousness, which which sparks this departure, and then you also see this awakening, this fight against rationalism, where he boils it down to, even if we set up the parameters of a utopian society where all man had to do, where man was given unlimited cakes, unlimited tea, and all he had to worry about was busying himself with the continuation of the species, the first thing he would do would be to tear it all down, so something interesting happened. Man can't help but introducing his fantastical, fatalistic element into the mix to prove to himself at any given moment of time that he is indeed a man and not an organ stop, not a piano key. To prove to himself, essentially, that he has free will and may exercise it as he chooses, as he pleases. And maybe that's what our narrator is doing in some sense. But jumping forward, so I would say that is something of an awakening, which is another key figure alluding to a traumatic-laden subtext. As we go on, in Apropos of the Wet Snow, we jump into the past. We jump into the narrator's past. Some 15, 16, I don't know. He's in his 20s. When the novel begins, he's 40 years old. He tells us he's 40 years old. Now he's in his early to mid-20s. And we follow the narrator to understand how he interacts with people, okay? We get a few vignettes of interactions in the underground portion, the earlier portion of the novella, in which he's carrying on a feud with a government or official of, a colleague of his for 16, 18, I can't remember the amount of months, because this official would not let the narrator get the better of him. The narrator liked to put people on their toes, liked to make people feel insecure and disgusted, and he liked to insult people. He took pleasure out of this. But this government official clanked his sword at him and would not let our nameless narrator get the better of him, so he carried on a feud with him for well over a year, I believe. And then in Apropos of the Wet Snow, we get much more of interaction with people as we jump in, as we rewind and get a glimpse of the narrator's past. So he goes to a dinner party with some colleagues of his, contemporaries of his, and at this dinner party, to back up a little bit. There's also a point in the novella where he sees a tavern, he sees a lively tavern, right? People drinking, having a good time, playing, I'm not sure what all they're doing inside, but he wants to go in and he wants to be thrown out of the window. But he can't even manage to do this. He can't even manage to get the one man to smack him in the face. He won't be acknowledged, and this is a deep fear for him, to not be acknowledged, to feel invisible, which he very much does. And when you feel invisible, you become nihilistic. There is no point in life if you are living within the confines of a prison of the mind, because you feel as though you're in solitary confinement. So I believe what our narrator is doing in the beginning is he is actualizing how he feels mentally by undergoing this self-imposed isolation. And I think that that extends beyond just the novella. Of course it does. Many mass atrocity, or not just mass lone wolves acting on violent impulses. School shootings. I don't even like to bring that up necessarily because it's a sensitive topic, but. And not to have empathy for these people. These people should be condemned, not to get into my views on things too deeply. I mean, of course, I have views. But you have to recognize there is a deep melancholy state that these people, as well as if maybe they're on psychotropic drugs, whatever. You can blame the pharmaceutical company. This is not meant to be a political video, okay? And remember from Roland Barthes, my interpretation of the text is not your interpretation of the text, okay? What is the author? Who is the author? The reader, in some sense, is just as important to the author because we, the reader, give meaning to the text, okay? But these people, these lone wolf attackers, domestic terrorists, if you will, they are in a deep state of depression. They must be to commit such a heinous act, okay? And I feel like this is the same state, this same depressive state our narrator finds himself in. And so in Apropos of the Wet Snow, continuing on with the text, continuing on with the summary, he goes to a dinner party with his colleagues, with his contemporaries. There he is insulted, feels insulted at least. So what does he do? He insults back tenfold. He insults everyone around him. Because what does he do when he feels anxious? What does he do when he feels insecure? He lashes out. He lashes out at himself, and by being spiteful, by not consulting doctors for his liver pain, which he recognizes he is not hurting the doctors, certainly. He is only hurting himself by doing so. But he does this out of spite. While at many points he tells us he's lying, like I said, you're left to whether he is a trustful narrator or not. But you have to take some of what he says at face value, and you have to use your intuition to assess what is rightful to accept and what we maybe shouldn't, okay? But so continuing along, he insults his dinner guests, and then he asks to borrow money so he can accompany them to a brothel. At the brothel, he meets a young prostitute named Liza. This prostitute I have it marked down in the book where he first sees her, okay? Just bear with me. So here, mechanically I glanced at the girl who had just entered, a fresh, young, rather pale face with straight, dark eyebrows and grave, as though slightly astonished eyes. I liked her immediately. I would have hated her if she had smiled. I looked at her more attentively, and almost with an effort, my mind had not yet cleared. There was something simple and kind in that face, but oddly serious. So, our narrator, and as Carruth puts, both the narrator and Liza sense something in one another. This is what allows them to get on. And what they sense in one another is trauma. Liza was forced into prostitution because she came from a poor family who could not take care of her. And I don't remember the specific details, whether she's making money for her family or whether she's just making money to survive on her own. She was forced into prostitution because of poverty. Our narrator feels very much disenfranchised, and our narrator feels very much it's him versus the world, or so it seems, okay? And as I laid out sort of the points in trauma, he's hyper conscious, which, just leads to inaction on his part. He feels as though everything is prearranged for him. Prearranged. I guess by being prearranged, it's a type of subjugation. As I will tell you how the novella ends later. It's a type of subjugation where if if these chains were even free and we began listening to our intuition and living according to our own free will, the first thing we would do would be to ask for these chains to be put back on because we don't know how to think for ourselves. We don't know how to live because we've never been alive in some sense. But so the narrator meets Liza. They seem to get on fairly well. But then our narrator can't help but to begin insulting her, begin berating her, tapping into his own degradation and projecting it onto her, okay? So he insults her, and then what ends up happening is, at the end, she visits him at his apartment, unannounced. She shows up to his apartment unannounced. And this is the final straw for him. This bothers him. It really pisses him off, okay? It pisses him the fuck off. Pardon my, words. Or colorful language. Because his apartment is a mess. He lives in a pigsty, okay? And so what he does, he just goes at her, calling her names. He speaks to her in a bookish manner. And a lot of stuff he, analyzes that it's going over her head. One problem with the narrator, and this happens when you spend a lot of time alone and you're not talking to people much, or at least having meaningful conversation. This could also be a result of hyperconsciousness, okay, being too aware. You begin projecting onto people. You begin assuming people's thoughts, internalizing them, and projecting them out onto people as their own thoughts. You're like psychoanalyzing so much, and you're assuming what you think they might be thinking about you are in reality their thoughts, or are, actually their thoughts, when in reality they're not. You cannot, while you may be intelligent, while you might be able to critical think and metacognition and all this BS, humans are so different. Culture is so different, across the world. And people are just so different. We've all, went through our own lived experience, which produces individuals, okay? You are an individual. I am an individual. We all have different lived experience. No one will have the exact same lived experience. But it's really unfortunate because this trauma allowed the narrator and Liza to hear the wounds beneath, or to see the wounds beneath the flesh in one another. And the narrator can't help but to assault her with his words, to verbally assault her. And, what he does in the end is he slips her, he puts in her hand a 5 ruble note, I believe, and tells her to essentially get lost. And given that she's a prostitute, I think he's insinuating that he paid for, her services, and now she can, leave, essentially. He doesn't need any pillow talk afterward, if you will. Unfortunately, that's what he needs desperately, even more so than sex. A good therapist isn't going to cut it, right? He needs about 12 of them. And plus probably he needs that slap in the face. Probably 12 of them. So, sorry, I got lost for a second. So yeah, he slips her this 5 ruble note. What she does is she leaves. Of course she does. She's insulted. And what he does, I got low battery. So what he does is she leaves. Then again, this inner conflict begins to spin. And this inner conflict, inner turmoil happens. He's not sure what to do. Should he chase after her? He thinks he wants to chase after her. And in fact, he does. But he stops short. And he realizes that, and he makes some good points about love, interesting points about love. He realizes that if he goes and begs for her forgiveness, if he falls to her feet and kisses her feet and begs for her back, will he not hate her the following day for doing so? For her having the ability to reduce him to nothing more than an irrational bag of emotions, meat sack of emotions that is being tyrannized, by someone else, that is subject to a tyrant's rule. Because he suggests, what is love? Either for a man or just in general, what is love but to want to be a tyrant over someone, to want to control someone? And W.H. Auden, in one of his poems, he says, I don't recall which one. It could be September, 1939. I don't recall. Okay, it might not even be that one, so don't quote me. I know it's W.H. Auden. What is universal love? Or nobody wants universal love, but to be loved alone. And I can certainly identify with that. What is universal love? Walt Whitman in the Brooklyn Ferry, crossing the Brooklyn Ferry and feeling the love and compassion across time and space. And I haven't read that poem in quite a while, so I could be missing the point. And I like that poem. But just this idea of universal love, sure, maybe sometimes you do feel it. But then other times, no, you don't. And really, it's a good thing to maybe practice to be kind to our neighbors. I will say that. And caring for our neighbors and help our neighbors. But in terms of, that's not love. Maybe that's care and compassion for your fellow man and a type of love for humanity, a type of humanitarian, practice or whatever, I don't know. But when it comes to love, when it comes to the person you're going to spend the rest of your life with, you want to be loved alone. And I can certainly identify with that. Okay, so he goes after her, but he doesn't see her. and you have the wet snow falling, which is a motif throughout, that sort of connects our first part underground portion of the novel with apropos of the wet snow. It is a motif that links the two sections. And yeah, but he doesn't find her. She's nowhere around. So it's interesting. He follows somewhat of his own rationale. I mean, his own ideology about the world. But at the same time, he very much will, at a given moment, try to prove to himself that he is a man and not an organ stop, okay? Running after Liza, trying to get smacked in the face, trying to get thrown out of a tavern, insulting, berating people. I think what he can't help but doing is introducing new trauma, because as he's reflecting on this interaction with Liza, he says to even reimagine it, to mark it down in his notes is incredibly painful, But I think what he can't help doing is introducing this new trauma to then, in the future, loathe over. Compulsory traumatic neuroses, or, he's acting out the trauma of his past, creating new trauma for the present, for the future, to, like I said, loathe over, and to feel shame over, to feel spite over, to live in a type of degradation. So, and in the end, like I hinted at, he compares us, talk about depressing. He compares all of man, all of humankind. Man, I shouldn't say man because that can be taken like as a type of universal archetype or whatever, universal experience. In, man, of course, there's woman too. And there's a number of different gender identities, and but that's what he refers to in this novella. So I'm saying man, and I think it's also ingrained within my speech somewhat. So I'm recognizing that bias, or what you want to call it, I don't know. But he compares us to stillborns because he believes we haven't began to live yet. We are subjugated by our own insecurities and what society tells us we should be and the track we should follow. And, all society's concerned with mathematics, 2 + 2 is 4. What's more interesting than 2 + 2 is 4, as our nameless narrator tells us? 2 + 2 = 5. I mean, this novella is very associative, but read this novella, even if you can't follow the story in this one too closely. Read it for the truths. Read it for the epiphanies that strike you and make you set the book down for a moment to contemplate. And even if that contemplation leads you around and around, as it does the narrator, I'm trying to find a way not to, that feels nihilistic. Even if that contemplation leads you around and around, as it does the narrator, talk to somebody about your interpretation of the text. I think that's what our narrator is missing. It feels as though Liza can pull him out of his own degradation, but acting out trauma of his past really damns him to a life in the underground and the depths of hell, really. So while this may be depressing, I watched a clip of Martin Scorsese talking about reading Dostoyevsky. And Notes from the Underground shows us the depths of hell. And it doesn't offer a way out necessarily, okay? Unless you maybe take this as an example of how not to live. But then you read the Brothers Karamazov, And Dostoyevsky offers a way out, offers the ladder to climb out of hell. And I'm only halfway through the Brothers Karamazov. And I have it with me. My backpack is zipped up, so I won't show it to you. So I haven't reached that point yet, besides understanding that God, of course, a spiritual awakening can bring us out of hell, metaphorically, literally, however you want to take it. And I don't mean God as in the literal sense, a man in the sky, and the biblical sense, rather. But God is an ideal. What is God to you, I feel like God can mean anything. It's not just the Christian understanding of God. Of course, Alyosha is a monk, so he's very much involved in the church or, in the monastery and believing in God. But I think discover what gives your life meaning, and pursue it as long as it's not endangering yourself or anyone else. And I recommend this book. I couldn't say enough positive things about such a depressing novella. My professor, as I touched on in the beginning, she had to read all of the works we selected to write about, okay? She had to read all of them. And almost, on cue, when she would see me, she would comment on how depressing this novella is to read, how much of a depressing read it is. And what I would say in response to that is, depressing at times, sure. Paradoxical, sure. Necessary, absolutely. Absolutely. Necessary for someone in that state to identify maybe their own problems with their own thought processes and their own inaction, identifying with life's bigger questions. What brings meaning to life, and can we find meaning in a seemingly meaningless world, in a world where everyone is fighting for our attention and people find a lot of substitutes for, for social interaction by like compulsive sort of hedonistic pleasure, with the internet, with porn, with video games, whatever it may be. I play video games all the time, so don't think I'm not, I'm hypocritical just like anybody else. Our narrator, that's what's so beautiful about this novella. It's contradiction in a book. It's paradox in a book. It's hypocrisy, in some sense. But life is a fucking paradox. Life is a joke, and it's serious, and it's so many more things. We try to boil it down to a math equation. You can't boil life down to a math equation. At some point, you have to put all that shit aside and just live, okay? So I think that concludes it. I would recommend reading it. Of course I would. As I would recommend reading other Dostoyevsky's works, Crime and Punishment, Demons, the Brothers Karamazov, as I alluded to. Because Dostoyevsky, in a way, is an analogous to, like, religion, almost. I mean, I guess philosophy, that's because he's philosophical, and philosophy, in some sense, is, could be a substitute for religion. It can be. It's great. It's a great novella, and a good read, yes. A depressing read, maybe. I certainly identified with the Underground Man, as many people do, and I recommend it. So thank you. More reviews to come, okay? Thank you for listening to me for nearly 40 effing minutes. Okay, I cursed, so 40 fucking minutes already. Or I cursed already, so 40 fucking minutes. Thank you.